"Don't enter the house," the boy's warning. "Don't enter the house, Bean," shouted the boy, his eyes filled with terror. The millionaire hesitated, and in that second everything changed. Hours later, they discovered hidden traps in every corner of the mansion. But the most frightening part was yet to come, and no one imagined who was behind it all. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The noise of machines echoed through the morning as Michael Reynolds parked his black Mercedes in front of the rusty gate. At 42, he had built an empire in real estate, transforming abandoned lots into luxury complexes that redesigned urban landscapes. Now, standing before that century-old mansion covered in ivy and neglect, he felt something different pulsing in his chest. It wasn't just another investment. It was a return to his roots, a reckoning with the past. The property had belonged to the Harrison family for 3 generations until debts and disagreements forced its abandonment. For 15 years, it had remained an architectural ghost in the residential neighborhood of Oak Hill, Chicago. The broken windows let escape echoes of old conversations, and the wild garden had swallowed the stone paths that once led distinguished visitors. Michael had bought it for 1/3 of the market value, not for the financial opportunity, but for what it represented. His own childhood had unfolded in a similar house, before his father's bankruptcy forced them to abandon everything. As he walked through the dusty rooms, accompanied by architect Henry Sanders, Michael visualized every detail of the restoration. The colored stained glass would once again filter the morning light, the noble hardwood floors would recover their original shine, and the grand central staircase would be the beating heart of a residence that would simultaneously breathe history and future. Henry noted each observation on his tablet, calculating timelines and budgets, but he noticed that his client saw beyond the numbers. There was passion in this project. The work began the following Monday. A team of 20 men specialized in historical restorations took over the property. Welders, carpenters, electricians, and masons worked in harmony, each contributing to resurrect the forgotten majesty of that construction. Michael visited the site daily, sometimes staying until late hours to monitor progress. He felt connected to that place in a way he couldn't fully explain. A few blocks away at the Hope Motel, whose name ironically contrasted with its decaying appearance, Tommy Wilson observed the construction movement through the foggy window of his room. At 10 years old, he possessed curious eyes and a fertile imagination that transformed the grey reality into colorful adventures. His mother, Lucy, worked as a cleaner in 3 different locations, leaving before dawn and returning when stars already dotted the urban sky. Tommy had learned to entertain himself, developing an extraordinary capacity for observation that the average adult had long lost. Every night, after Lucy fell asleep exhausted, Tommy silently escaped from the room and walked through the tree-lined streets of the neighborhood. It wasn't rebellion that moved him, but a deep need to daydream. He always carried a worn notebook where he drew imaginary houses, mansions with tall towers, chalets with smoking chimneys, bungalows with flowery porches. Each drawing represented a home he would like to have, a place where he and his mother could finally stop running from difficulties. The mansion under renovation had become his favorite. Hidden behind the bushes of the neighboring property, Tommy spent hours watching the workers transform that ruin into something magical. He saw in the slowly restored stained glass the colors of his dreams, and in the gardens that were beginning to revive, the promise that forgotten things could come back to life. In his notebook, he drew the mansion dozens of times, each version more detailed than the previous one, as if by drawing it he could somehow inhabit it. During the day, when workers filled the place with noise and movement, Tommy stayed at the motel studying or helping the elderly receptionist with small tasks in exchange for some loose change. But it was at night that he felt truly free. The darkness protected him from others' curiosity and allowed his imagination to fly without constraints. On these nightly walks, he began to notice details that others ignored. Cars circulating at suspicious hours, shadows that moved when they should have been still, noises that didn't match the expected tranquility of the residential neighborhood. On a particularly cold Tuesday, when the Chicago drizzle transformed the streets into wet mirrors, Tommy noticed something different. A black car with no visible front license plate was parked 3 blocks before the mansion. It wasn't the first strange vehicle he had observed, but there was something about its presence that made him uneasy. The boy approached cautiously, always staying in the shadow of the streetlights, and noticed that there were 3 men inside the car. They wore dark clothes and seemed to be waiting for some signal. For almost an hour, Tommy watched them from a distance, hidden behind a half-open gate. The men didn't talk, didn't smoke, didn't show impatience. They remained motionless like statues, with a discipline that contrasted with any normal situation. When they finally moved, it was with a synchronization that seemed rehearsed. They exited the car simultaneously, closed the doors without making noise, and walked toward the mansion with calculated steps. Tommy followed them at a distance, his heart accelerating with each meter covered. Something in his childish intuition screamed that this situation wasn't normal. The men didn't head to the main gate, where a sign indicated the working hours of the construction and the contacts of the responsible company. Instead, they circled the property until finding a side opening that Tommy didn't even know existed. There, one of the walls had been partially demolished to facilitate the entry of construction materials, and a temporary fence protected the access. With appropriate tools, they opened the passage in a matter of seconds. The boy approached as much as he dared, taking shelter behind a dumpster. From there, he could see figures moving inside the mansion, with small but powerful flashlights. These weren't movements of vandalism or common theft. There was method in that invasion, a precision that suggested prior knowledge of the room layout. For 15 minutes, the lights danced through the windows like lost fireflies, until suddenly they went out. The 3 men emerged from the mansion carrying a small toolbox that they didn't have when they entered, and a pouch that one of them carefully attached to his chest. They retraced their path in silence, put the temporary fence back in its original position, and returned to the car with the same military discipline with which they had left. The engine started smoothly, the headlights remained off for almost a block, and then they disappeared into the night fog as if they had never existed. Tommy remained hidden for another 20 minutes, waiting to be sure they wouldn't return. His body trembled, not just from the cold drizzle, but from a sensation of having witnessed something serious without understanding exactly what. When he finally dared to approach the temporary fence, he noticed that it had been repositioned with such care that it would be impossible for someone inattentive to notice it had been moved. But Tommy wasn't inattentive. He observed everything, memorized details, built mental narratives that helped him make sense of the world around him. That night, back in the stuffy motel room, he couldn't sleep. He drew in his notebook 3 shadowy figures walking toward a house, and for some reason he couldn't explain. He colored their clothes red. When his mother woke up for another day of work, she found him sleeping on top of the drawing, as if trying to protect it from some invisible evil. For 3 days, Tommy carried the weight of what he had witnessed like a toxic secret burning in his chest. He tried to tell his mother, but Lucy arrived home so exhausted that she could barely keep her eyes open while heating dinner in the microwave. The words got stuck in his throat every time he tried to form sentences about masked men and night invasions, how to explain something that he himself didn't completely understand. At school during classes, his mind constantly wandered to the mansion. He drew in the corners of his notebooks the same 3 shadowy figures, trying to capture details that his memory had stored: the military posture, the specialized tools, the perfect coordination of their movements. The English teacher, Mrs. Helen, noticed his distraction and called him to attention several times, but Tommy seemed to be in another world, a place where adults did terrible things that children shouldn't understand. Michael Reynolds, unaware of what had happened on his property, continued visiting the construction site daily, increasingly satisfied with the progress. The stained glass had been completely restored and now projected multicolored rainbows on the main rooms when the afternoon sun passed through them. The noble hardwood floor had been sanded and varnished, recovering a shine not seen for decades. The central staircase, with its hand-carved banister, had once again become the majestic element connecting the 2 floors of the residence. Henry Sanders presented enthusiastic weekly reports on the progress of the work. The electrical and plumbing systems had been completely modernized while remaining faithful to the original architectural design. The gas installation had been executed by a specialized company, following all current safety standards. In 2 weeks, the mansion would be ready to receive its new resident, and Michael had already begun planning the decoration of each room. On the Thursday following the events that had so disturbed Tommy, Michael arrived at the site accompanied by his personal assistant, Megan Smith, for a final inspection of the details that would precede his move. He was a meticulous man who left nothing to chance, especially when it came to something as personally significant as that residence. As they walked through the rooms, they discussed the placement of antique furniture that Michael had specially restored to match the style of the house. It was during this visit that Tommy made the decision that would change both their lives. He had spent the entire morning at the motel, pretending to be sick to avoid going to school. In reality, gathering courage to do something he knew was necessary but terrified him. He put on his best clothes, a blue polo shirt he had received the previous Christmas, and walked determinedly toward the mansion, carrying his drawing notebook as if it were a protective shield. When he spotted the black Mercedes parked in front of the gate, his heart raced. There was the man he needed to save, chatting animatedly with an elegant woman about details Tommy couldn't hear from a distance. For a few minutes, he remained standing on the opposite sidewalk, trying to find adequate words to explain something that sounded like childish fantasy. How could a 10-year-old boy convince a successful businessman that his life was in danger? Michael noticed the boy's presence before Tommy gathered enough courage to approach. There was something in the posture of that skinny child, wearing simple but clean clothes, that caught his attention. The boy didn't seem to be just passing by the location casually. There was determination in his dark eyes, an intensity that didn't match his apparent age. When their eyes met across the street, Tommy knew it was now or never. He ran across the street, almost being hit by a motorcycle that honked angrily. Michael and Megan were startled by the sudden approach, but something in the desperate expression of the boy made them stay where they were instead of moving away. Tommy stopped in front of the gate, breathless, trying to organize the words he had mentally rehearsed for days. "Sir, you can't enter that house," he shouted with a voice that mixed urgency and fear. "There are bad men who did something inside. I saw them. They entered at night and messed with something." Michael and Megan exchanged confused looks. At first, they thought they were facing a childish prank, or perhaps a poorly executed extortion attempt. But there was something in the desperate sincerity of that boy that prevented them from simply ignoring him and moving on. Michael approached the gate, crouching down to be at eye level with Tommy. "Calm down, son. Take a deep breath and tell me exactly what you saw," he said, with a gentle but serious voice. There was something in Michael's tone that conveyed confidence to Tommy, making him realize he had finally found someone willing to listen to him. With trembling hands, Tommy opened his notebook to the page where he had drawn the scene he had witnessed. The drawing was primitive, made with ordinary colored pencils, but it captured surprisingly precise details: 3 dark figures, a large house, a car without plates, strange tools. As he showed the drawing, Tommy narrated everything he had seen on that rainy night, from the moment he noticed the suspicious car to the silent escape of the invaders. Megan, initially skeptical, began to pay more attention when Tommy described with precision the location of the side opening in the wall, a detail that only someone who really knew the property could know. Michael felt a chill run down his spine when the boy mentioned the specialized tools in the bag that the men took away. There was something deeply disturbing about that narrative. "And are you sure they messed with something inside the house?" asked Michael, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Tommy nodded energetically. "Yes, sir. They had small flashlights and stayed inside for a long time. When they came out, one of them carried a different bag, and the other had a small pouch he didn't have before. They knew exactly where to go, as if they already knew the house." Michael stood up slowly, his business instinct, sharpened by years of complex negotiations and risk situations, beginning to process the implications of what he had just heard. If the boy was telling the truth, and everything in his expression suggested he was, then someone had violated his property with purposes that went beyond common vandalism. The precision described by Tommy indicated insider knowledge, prior planning. "Megan, call the police now," he ordered, taking his own cell phone from his pocket. "And also call the security company that installed the alarm system. I want a complete sweep of the property before setting foot inside." While Megan made the necessary calls, Michael knelt again before Tommy, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "What's your name, kid?" "Tommy Wilson, sir. I live there at the motel with my mom." "Tommy, you may have saved my life today. If what you saw is true, and I believe it is, you prevented something very serious from happening." Michael paused for a moment, studying the serious face of that child who carried responsibilities too heavy for his age. "Where is your mother now?" "Working, sir. She cleans 3 different places every day. She only comes back at night." Michael felt a tightness in his chest, imagining that brave boy spending his days alone, carrying such a heavy burden without having an adult to protect him. "Tommy, you're going to stay here with us until the police arrive. I want you to tell them exactly what you told me, and afterwards we'll find your mother and explain everything to her. You did the right thing." 15 minutes later, 2 detective cars arrived at the scene, followed by a van from the electronic security company. The detective in charge, an experienced man named Charles Miller, listened attentively to Tommy's account, asking detailed questions about times, physical descriptions of the invaders, and procedures that the boy had observed. Initially skeptical, as any experienced police officer would be facing the testimony of a child, the detective changed his stance when the security technicians began sweeping the property. What they found in the mansion was much worse than anyone could have imagined. The technical sweep of the mansion revealed a reality that exceeded Michael's worst fears. The security specialists, equipped with electronic detectors and analysis equipment, discovered subtle but lethal alterations to the gas and electrical systems of the residence. Someone had installed sabotage devices so sophisticated that they would go unnoticed during a routine inspection, but could cause a devastating explosion as soon as the systems were normally activated. Detective Charles Miller examined the equipment found with a somber expression. These weren't improvised or homemade devices. The technical precision and quality of the components indicated substantial funding and specialized knowledge. Someone had invested considerable time, money, and planning to ensure that Michael Reynolds would not survive his first night in the restored mansion. "Mr. Reynolds," said the detective, removing his latex gloves after examining the disarmed devices, "I need to be direct with you. This isn't a common crime. We're talking about a premeditated attempted homicide executed by professionals. Someone wanted your elimination in a way that would appear accidental. If this boy hadn't alerted us, we would be investigating your explosion instead of an attempted sabotage." Michael felt his legs weaken. Throughout his business career, he had faced aggressive competitors, hostile negotiations, and extreme financial pressures, but never imagined that someone would literally try to eliminate him. He looked at Tommy, who remained beside Megan, still holding his notebook of drawings like a protective amulet, and realized that he owed his life to that observant child. The investigations began immediately. Michael provided a list of all people who had access to the mansion's blueprints, including architects, contractors, employees of his company, and business partners. The detective established a task force to investigate each name, analyzing financial histories, electronic communications, and possible motivations for a crime of that magnitude. During the following days, Michael insisted that Tommy and his mother temporarily move to a secure hotel, at his expense. Lucy Wilson, initially resistant out of pride, ended up accepting when she understood the gravity of the situation and the heroic role her son had played. She was a simple woman who worked tirelessly to support her son alone since her husband had abandoned them 3 years earlier, and never imagined that Tommy could become involved in something so dangerous. The first suspicion fell on Mark Ferreira, a former employee of Michael who had been fired the previous week for financial irregularities. Mark had access to the mansion's blueprints through his previous work in the company's project department, and investigators discovered that he was facing serious financial difficulties, including gambling debts that could have served as motivation to accept money in exchange for privileged information. When the police went to arrest him, Mark was at home surrounded by empty bottles and receipts of lost bets. He initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with evidence of his access to the mansion's blueprints and his desperate financial situation, he ended up partially confessing. He admitted to providing the architectural plans to an intermediary, but swore he didn't know they would be used for sabotage. "They told me it was for an independent security assessment," stammered Mark during the interrogation, his hands trembling from nervousness and withdrawal. "They paid me $15,000 just for the blueprints. I needed the money. I had bet everything I had on online games. I never imagined they would do something like this." Detective Miller didn't completely believe Mark's version, but there were details in his confession that suggested he really didn't know the complete plan. The sophistication of the sabotage devices was far beyond his technical or financial capabilities. Mark was a piece in the puzzle, but not the mastermind of the operation. The investigation took a new direction when experts analyzed security cameras from establishments near the mansion. Although no camera directly captured the invasion described by Tommy, a camera from a pharmacy located 3 blocks away had recorded the passage of the black car without plates at the time mentioned by the boy. More importantly, it had partially captured the physiognomy of one of the vehicle's occupants. Michael immediately recognized the face in the grainy image from the security camera. It was Brian Cole, his oldest partner and the person he trusted most in business. Together for 15 years, Brian had been instrumental in building Michael's real estate empire, participating in all important decisions and having unrestricted access to confidential company information. The discovery was a devastating blow to Michael. Brian wasn't just his partner, he was practically a brother, someone who knew his most intimate dreams, fears, and ambitions. They had faced financial crises together, celebrated victories, shared risks and profits, with a trust that Michael judged unshakable. The idea that Brian could be behind the sabotage attempt was more painful than the physical threat he had faced. When confronted with the evidence, Brian initially tried to deny, claiming that the car seen in the cameras was similar to his, but not the same vehicle. However, the investigation of his phone records and bank transactions revealed a pattern of suspicious communications and significant value transfers to offshore accounts in the days preceding the sabotage. Brian's motivation was discovered through a detailed audit of the company's finances. He had been diverting resources for at least 2 years, creating a complex network of shell companies and fictitious contracts to hide his actions. Michael, blindly trusting his partner, had never questioned the operations that Brian personally supervised. The hole in the accounts approached $20 million. "You don't understand, Michael," said Brian during their last meeting before his arrest, tears running down his face as he confessed the betrayal. "I didn't want it to come to this. I started diverting just small amounts to cover personal investments that went wrong. But the situation spiraled out of control. When you announced that you were going to do a complete audit for international expansion, I knew I would be discovered. The only way out was for you to no longer be here to discover it." Michael heard the confession in silence, feeling as if a fundamental part of his identity was being destroyed. The financial betrayal was serious, but could be overcome with time and work. The attempt at physical elimination was unforgivable. He looked at the man he had considered a brother and no longer recognized anything of the Brian he had known. 15 years of partnership, Brian. 15 years of mutual trust. If you had come to talk to me about the debts, we would have found a solution together. We always did that. Why did you choose this path? Brian lowered his head, unable to sustain Michael's gaze. "Because I was afraid of disappointing you. You were always the visionary, the natural leader. I was just the guy who took care of the details. When I started making mistakes with personal investments, I couldn't admit that I had failed. Each lie led to a bigger lie until there was no way back." Brian's complete confession revealed that he had hired the 3 men through intermediaries, paying them $200,000 to execute the sabotage in a way that would look like a domestic accident. The plan was to take complete control of the company after Michael's elimination, using the commotion of the tragedy to consolidate power and definitively hide his financial diversions. While processing the magnitude of the betrayal, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Tommy. That 10-year-old boy, living in a decadent motel with his hard-working mother, had demonstrated more courage and integrity in a single night than Brian in 15 years of partnership. The irony of the situation was painful, but also revealing about human nature and the value of preserved innocence. Tommy, oblivious to the financial and emotional complexities that his discovery had triggered, continued drawing in his notebook, now filling entire pages with images of heroes saving people in danger. He didn't see himself as a hero, he saw himself only as someone who did what was right when confronted with evil. 6 months after the events that forever changed their lives, Michael Reynolds was standing by the window of his renovated office, observing the movement of the city, when Megan entered with a folder of documents he had been eagerly awaiting. These weren't commercial contracts or financial reports, but papers that represented something much more significant than any business he had ever closed. "Everything is ready, Michael," said Megan with a warm smile. "The house is completely finished, and the property transfer papers are here. Tommy and Lucy can move in whenever they want." Michael took the documents with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. During the last months, while the company restructured after the scandal involving Brian Cole, He had secretly worked on a personal project that he considered the most important of his life. He had bought a modest but comfortable house in a safe neighborhood of Chicago, had completely renovated it, and was transferring it to Lucy Wilson's name, free of any burden or condition. The decision had emerged spontaneously on the night Brian was arrested. Michael had returned home disturbed by the betrayal, but mainly impacted by the purity of Tommy's actions. That boy had risked his safety to save a complete stranger, expecting nothing in return, moved only by the certainty that it was the right thing to do. It was a type of heroism that Michael, accustomed to the corrupt world of business, had forgotten existed. The company had survived the scandal better than Michael expected. The complete audit revealed that the damages, although significant, were less than initially feared. More importantly, the story of how Tommy had saved his life had spread through the media, creating a wave of public sympathy that strengthened the company's image. Michael took advantage of this moment to implement transparency and social responsibility policies that completely transformed the organizational culture. Tommy, in turn, had flourished during those months of stability. Living in the secure hotel funded by Michael, he had enrolled in a quality private school where his natural intelligence and capacity for observation finally found adequate stimulation. His grades were excellent, especially in creative writing and arts, where he transformed his experiences into stories and drawings that impressed teachers and classmates. Lucy had also experienced significant changes. Michael had hired her to supervise the cleaning and maintenance of all his company's buildings, a position that gave her financial stability and regular hours that allowed her to spend more time with her son. She was a woman of unshakable dignity, who initially resisted the idea of accepting the house as a gift, insisting that she wanted to earn things with my own work. Lucy, Michael had argued during a frank conversation they had the week before, your son saved my life. There's no monetary value for that. This house isn't charity, it's gratitude. It's the recognition that your family possesses something the world needs to see more of, genuine moral courage. Accept this as an investment in Tommy's future, so he can grow up knowing that doing good always pays off. The move to the new house was scheduled for a sunny Saturday in September. Michael made a point of being present, not as a benefactor, but as a friend of the family that Tommy and Lucy had become to him. He arrived early, carrying a box of carefully chosen gifts, art books for Tommy, flower seedlings for the garden that Lucy had always dreamed of having, and a new television to replace the old model they had brought from the motel. When Tommy saw the house for the first time, his eyes filled with tears that he tried to hide by turning his face to the side. It was exactly like the houses he drew in his notebook. It had a flowery porch, large windows that let in lots of light, a small but well-kept garden, and 3 bedrooms enough for him to have his own space to draw and study. "Is it real, Mum?" asked Tommy with a choked voice, still not completely believing that house was his. "Are we really going to live here?" Lucy hugged her son, herself too emotional to speak immediately. She had spent years struggling to give her son a better life, working multiple jobs, saving every penny in the hope of one day being able to offer him stability and comfort. Seeing that dream come true in a way she never imagined was overwhelming. "It's real, my love," she finally managed to say, "and you deserve all this because you were brave when you needed to be, because you chose to help when you could have stayed quiet, because you have a good and pure heart." Michael observed the scene from a distance, feeling a deep satisfaction that no business success had ever provided him. He had discovered that true wealth wasn't in the properties he had accumulated or the profits he had generated, but in the capacity to use his resources to multiply goodness in the world. Tommy had taught him that heroism didn't depend on power or money, but on the disposition to act correctly when confronted with the choice between good and convenience. During the following weeks, Michael became a regular presence in the Wilson family's life. He visited them on weekends, always bringing some small but significant gift. Art supplies for Tommy, cookbooks for Lucy, plants for the garden she was creating with such care. These weren't gestures of charity, but of genuine friendship between people who had discovered each other's value. Tommy continued drawing, but his drawings changed theme. Instead of dreamed houses, he now portrayed people helping other people. Firefighters saving cats from trees, doctors caring for children, teachers teaching students. When questioned about the change, he explained with simplicity, "Now that I have my dream house, I want to draw how people can help each other. It's more interesting than houses. Tommy's story eventually reached local newspapers and then national ones. Reporters wanted to interview him. Television producers offered contracts for documentaries. Publishers showed interest in publishing a book about his experience. Michael and Lucy decided together to accept only opportunities that could be educational for other children, using the platform that fame offered to promote positive values. In a particularly touching interview for a children's television program, Tommy was asked about what motivated him to approach Michael on that decisive day, even though he was afraid. His response, said with the simple honesty of a child, moved viewers across the country. "I learned at school that when we see someone in danger, we have to help. And my mum always told me that doing the right thing is sometimes difficult, but it's always the right thing. I was scared, but I was more scared that something bad would happen to Mr. Reynolds because of something I could have prevented. So I chose to help." Michael, watching the interview from his living room, felt his eyes water. That child had synthesized in a few words a life philosophy that many adults took decades to understand: that moral courage is the foundation of a just society, and that each person has the power and responsibility to make a difference when confronted with the opportunity. A year after the events that united them, Michael organized a special birthday party for Tommy at his restored mansion, the same one that had almost become his tomb. The property had been completely renovated again, this time with state-of-the-art security systems, and served as the setting for a celebration that brought together not only Tommy and Lucy, but also the boys' schoolmates, some employees of Michael's company who had been enchanted by the story, and even Detective Charles Miller, who had become a friend of the family. During the party, Michael gave a speech that summarized everything he had learned in that transformative year. "Tommy taught me that true heroism doesn't come from superpowers or wealth, but from the willingness to do what is right, even when it's difficult. He saved me not only from an explosion, but from a life empty of real purpose. He showed me that success only has meaning when it's used to multiply good in the world." Tommy, now 11 years old and notably more confident, responded with the maturity that his experiences had given him. "Mr. Reynolds, you also taught me something important. You taught me that when we do good, good things happen back, not because we expect a reward, but because the world becomes a better place when people take care of each other." That night, as the guests said goodbye and the mansion's lights went out one by one, Michael remained in the garden, observing the stars. He thought about Brian, who was serving his sentence in closed regime, but had written him a letter asking for forgiveness and expressing genuine regret. He thought about the company, which now prospered under new ethical principles that he had implemented. But mainly he thought about Tommy, who slept in his own house for the first time in his life, dreaming of a future that now seemed infinitely possible. The greatest lesson Michael had learned wasn't about security or how to identify betrayals, but about the transformative power of genuine kindness. Tommy hadn't been rewarded for being nice, he had been recognized for being brave, and that courage had created a wave of positivity that would continue spreading far beyond their individual lives, touching other people who would hear their story and perhaps find inspiration for their own acts of everyday heroism. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Tommy and Michael has touched you deeply. This narrative about courage, gratitude, and the transformative power of kindness reminds us that heroes exist among us, sometimes in the most unexpected places. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about ordinary people who made extraordinary differences. You can find it by clicking on the video description. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of human nature. Don't miss our upcoming content. We await you in the comments to share your own stories of courage and kindness.